Bava Metzia Daf Zayin Amud Aleph, Severance, Kritut Ba'innan Velichah, where we're going to explore that unconditional giving can be the least generous form of giving, not the most generous form of giving, and we'll understand that. I met an amazing friend last night. I'd never met before, and we spent most of the night together and most of this morning together. I persuaded him to come into the Beis HaMedrash, and I will introduce him to him later on. He's from 18th century Rabat in Morocco, and just a different way of seeing the world that is so fascinating. Let's have a look and see. Firstly, we base on two psukim that we need to know. The one is from Megillas Ruth, where we learn the principle of a kinyan sudar. That is, if I'm selling you my car in New York and we're sitting here in Ra'anana, how do you do a kinyan on the car in New York? So we do a kinyan sudar. You give me your scarf as if you're exchanging scarf for car. I do a kinyan on your scarf, and then the car becomes yours as a consequence of that. That's called a kinyan sudar. So it's a symbolic exchange. And we learn that from Megillas Ruth, v'natan shalaf ish na'alo v'natan l're'ehu, the kinyan for yibum, which we discussed in Masechta Yevomus a lot, the taking off your shoe and giving it to your friend. The shoe is just a symbol, because that's a kli, because that's an object, a utensil that has a use. It can be used for the purpose of kinyan sudar that we learn in Megillas Ruth. In Parshas Kiteitzei, we have the posuk that we dealt with in the whole of Masechta Gittin, was on this, almost on this one posuk, where he has to write a sefer kritut, a book of cutting off, of termination, a letter of termination, of severance, v'natan biyada, and give it into her hand. So in both cases, we've got this v'natan. In the case of the kinyan sudar, it's v'natan l're'ehu, and he gives it to his friend. In the case of the get, v'natan biyada, he puts it into her hand. The husband puts the get into the hand of the wife. We're dealing with a Mishnah where two people find the talis, two people find a garment, they're both holding on to it, each one says, I found it, each one says, it's all mine. Our Gemara modifies that case and says it must be talking where they've caught hold of the fringes, they've caught hold of the tzitzis. They're not actually holding the garment, because what does the Mishnah say is the din? That we divide the garment in two. But we see in our Gemara a case that Rabbi of Ohr brings, where if two people are actually holding the garment itself, the area that they're holding, each one owns. You only split the difference. You split what nobody's holding. So if each one is holding 3 tfachim, 3 cubits of cloth, and in the middle there's another 6 cubits of cloth, then, not the cubits, tfachim, then you would split the 6. Each one would get 3, and they would each get what they're holding on to. So that's not what the Mishnah is talking about. The Mishnah is talking about where they're holding on to the fringes. Says our Gemara, Amar Rav Meshashaya, in the third line of the Gemara on the source sheet, Shema mina hai sudra, kivan detafis be shalosh al shalosh karinan be v'natan l're'ehu. So when it comes to a kinyan sudar, says the Gemara, if I'm holding 3 by 3, 3 tvachim by 3 tvachim of this scarf that you've given me so that you can acquire my car in New York, if I'm holding 3 by 3, that's considered that I've been koined. I've actually am holding it, because 3 by 3 is considered a garment, a piece of cloth that is 3 tvachim by 3 tvachim is when it comes to hilchot tumah, that's considered a garment. So if I'm holding in my hand, even though you're holding the rest of it, I'm just holding a piece of cloth 3 by 3, I have acquired that 3 by 3 piece of cloth, and you've acquired the car. The command the pasik dami v'kani. We treat it as if it's cut off as a separate thing. It's what he's holding, just as the case is two people are holding the talis that they found. Each one is holding, and we're talking not about our case in the Mishnah, you're holding the tzitzis, we're talking about where you're holding the cloth itself. The part you're holding is yours. You're koine. You acquire the part that you're holding. So it's in your possession. So here too with the kinyan sudar, if I'm holding that portion, the portion I'm holding is in my possession and belongs to me. Asks the Gemara, so why does this not work in Rav Chisda's case? Where Rav Chisda says, get biyada umshicha biyado. He gives her a get with strings attached. But literally, there's a string attached to the get. And he puts the get in her hand, but there's a string and he's holding the string. So it's quite a metaphor for a strings attached. Maybe this is where the saying comes from. If the string is strong enough for him to pull, and to pull the get back into his own hands, it doesn't work. The get is not a get. V'im lav mugureshet, but if he can't, if it's a very weak thread and if he pulls it, it will snap, then the get is valid, her divorce works. Answers the Gemara, no, you can't compare get with kinyan. Although there is a kinyan in get, and the word v'natan is used, he shall give, just as the case of sudar, but that's where the similarity ends. Because hatam kritut ba'inyan veliכא. It's not enough just to give it to her. You've also got to sever your relationship with her. What you give to her has to be a letter of severance. And if you've still got a string attached, that's not severance. But when it comes to the kinyan, all you've got to do is give him the scarf. And you've given him 3 by 3 of the scarf, and that's sufficient. He now holds that 3 by 3 of the scarf. That's sufficient for him. There's no further din. It just has to be netina. It just has to be a gift. It has to be an act of giving. So the Gemara is how you can, and there is. So the Gemara seems to be saying there are 2 dimensions here to giving. In the normal case, giving means I give it to you, with strings attached, without strings attached, but I give it to you. By get, there's an additional requirement of kritut. This that I'm giving to you should be an act of severance, not an act of continued attachment. Now, very important, there are 2 Rashis. There's a Rashi in our Gemara, which I bring, the last Rashi that I bring here, the word kritut, means havdalah, separation. Shiyu muvdalim ze mizeh, they have to be separated one from the other. V'harei agudim heim b'chut zeh, and this thread keeps them attached. She's got to still say to him, let go, let go, let go. They're still in communication. They've still got a relationship going, which is manifests in this thread that he's holding on to. That's not havdalah. That's not separation, says Rashi. But Rashi, in a slightly different topic in Gittin on Daf Ayin Chet, says something else. It says, V'anan v'natan biyada ba'inyan ad she'ehei kulo birshuta. If she doesn't hold it all, it's not called v'natan biyada. He's got to put it in her hand. She must hold it all. So it appears from these 2 Rashis that there are 2 dimensions, there are 2 elements here. The netina, the giving has to be an absolute giving, and there needs to be kritut. Tosfos goes further and examines a case where there is kritut, but there isn't giving. How does that work? He puts it in her hand, and he's holding onto the thread. She then clenches her fist and holds the get so tightly that he can't pull it out. So there's been netina, you would think. He put it in her hand, and there's kritut because he can't pull it out. Says Tosfos, but since she did the giving, not him, she grabbed it. When he gave it to her, he could still pull it out. So that was not netina, that was not gifting. Afterwards, she closed her hand on it, and that was kritut. Now he can't take it away anymore. But she did that, and v'natan biyada means he must be the giver. He has to do the whole act of giving, of putting the get in her hand. So you need v'natan biyada, not just v'natan. In the case of kinyan sudar, it says v'natan l're'eh, we must give it to his friend. In the case of the get, it says v'natan biyada, says Tosfos. Biyada means he must put it in her hand entirely without any further control over it. And you'll remember in Gittin we talked a lot about how the get is gifting her independence. And it's important that he relinquishes all control over her. You can't give her a get and keep control. You're giving her independence, at least that's what the get is doing. So this with the string attached is problematic altogether. That's how Tosfos learns it. And again, it seems to be that we're still talking about 2 elements of the netina must be complete, the giving must be complete, and there needs to be kritut in the case of get. In other cases of giving, there doesn't need to be kritut. There doesn't have to be severance. You just give a person something. In the case of get, you need to give, and there needs to be severance. It's a different issue. But it's possible that Tosfos is saying something a little different. There is so much discussion in the Achronim on this, and I'm just trying to cut through it and get to the essence. And this is where this remarkable encounter last night happened. So I met Rabbi Eliezer ben Shmuel di Avila. Who's heard of Rabbi Eliezer ben Shmuel di Avila? I'd never heard of him. And I found his sefer and saw that he comments on the Tosfos. I was busy trying to understand the Tosfos, and I saw he has a different angle on the Tosfos that he was thinking very originally. And then I saw he had on the Gemara just a couple of words on the Gemara. And it's interesting, the Chido writes about him. So he was a Rov and a Dayan in Rabat, His Sefer was published in 1785 posthumously, so he had already died by then. He died very young. He was 47 when he died. The Chidah writes that he was an amazing, amazing Talmid Chacham. He was a nephew of the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, so a very important Torah family. And the Chidah says that he used to write and erase, and write and erase, and write and erase. So all we see is the end product. And nobody really understands how brilliant and deep and complex his mind was. Because what we got when he'd finished all the workings out, he erased all the workings out and he just gave us the bottom line. And it looks very simple. But I realized as soon as I saw it, this is not simple. This is a complete new way of learning the sugya. Look what he says, and you see I didn't even find a digital version of this. Hachanetina ba'inan perush. The netina mashma kolduhu. When the Torah says you must give it means give it any way you want. Ela de gabi get galikra. But when it comes to get, the Torah reveals de ba'inan netina ma'alya. You need a really good gifting. What's he saying? What's so amazing about what he's saying? He's saying this is not two things. There's not netina and kritut. Kritut is a degree of netina. There's netina that severs, and there's netina that doesn't sever. But the chidush, the amazing thing in his work here is that a netina that severs is the highest form of netina. He calls that netina ma'alya. Why would that be? Think of gifting on a spectrum. I can give you something on condition you do something for me in return. That's called a bribe. Or payment, but I'll give it to you up front. I have an expectation. I'm giving this to you and I expect you to do something. I'm gifting it to you, but there's an expectation. I can give you a gift. I give you a box of chocolates or a bottle of wine. I give you a gift. There's no formal expectation of payment, but there's a social expectation of reciprocation. Next time you come to my house, you bring me something, and that's how we build up relationships. We give each other things. There's an expectation of reciprocation. But I can also give you severance pay and say, here's your 3 months' pay, get out of here, I don't want to see you again. That should be the most generous of all. It's unconditional, I don't expect anything back from you. In fact, I don't want anything back from you. Surely that's the most generous of all. That's netina ma'alya. But what do we learn? That when there's a netina ma'alya, there's kritut. That's what kritut means. Kritut means, says Rabbi Elazar ben Shmuel di Avilo, he says, that's what kritut means. Kritut means the highest form of giving. Giving to such a degree that I expect nothing in return. And that's called a divorce. That's called severance. Because relationship is from giving things where you do have an expectation. That's how you build relationship. You build a relationship from not a netina ma'alya. You build a relationship from a conditional netina. Or giving something, so you would think, what is greater, to give something conditionally or unconditionally? It's much greater to give it conditionally. Yes, it's a netina ma'alya, it's a more absolute gift to give somebody something and expect nothing in return, but then there's no investment. What is greater for me to invest in your business and saying, I'm expecting to see some results from this. I'm giving you $10,000 and I'm hoping to get profits from this because I believe in you. Or to say, you know what, Nebuch, here's $10,000, you don't owe me anything. What's more respectful? What's a greater act of netina? Well, from the pure act of giving, unconditional giving is greater. Charity would be the greatest form of giving. But from a sense of relationship building, netina with conditions is greater. I do expect something in return. When a husband gives a wife a gift, he expects in return. When she gives him a gift, she expects in return. When a parent invests in a child, he expects the child to perform in certain ways. We have expectations from the gifts we give, and that builds relationship. If we go to netina ma'alya, we have no expectation, and that is severance. Unbelievable concept that emerges from the way that Rabbi Elazar ben Shmuel di Avilo learns this piece of Gemara and understands the Tosfos. And we see that in our relationship to Hashem as well. Because we often talk about what is the principle of Rasha v'Tovlo. How do wicked people sometimes have it so easy? And everything seems to go for them. If you ever come across that, bad people have a good time. How does that work? And the Sforim say one of the reasons is because Hashem is paying them off. It's payment without expectations of anything in return. Take your beautiful house in Miami and take your yacht in Monaco and take your private jet and goodbye. After your death, I don't want to see you. I don't want you up here. I want to pay you off. That's severance. That's not what we want from the Ribbono Shel Olam. When we daven for parnasa, what do we ask from the Ribbono Shel Olam? Has mainly parnasati, to make my parnasa available, kedei she'uchal la'asor tzornecha, so that I can fulfill your will and I can do your mitzvot. That's why I'm asking you to sustain me. Don't pay me off. Invest in me. Give me what I need to be able to fulfill the Torah. I don't want unconditional gifts from you, Ribbono Shel Olam. I don't want unconditional gifts from anybody. I want gifts from people who expect something in return so that we build relationship. That shows me you believe in me. That shows me that you want to continue in a relationship with me. What about a matana ma'alia and a tina ma'alia? But the best is to give it unconditionally? That's Christianity. Unconditional giving is the highest form of giving. In the Torah, unconditional giving is not the highest form of giving. The highest form of giving is investing in other people conditionally with an expectation of returns, because that shows that you believe in the other person, that you trust the other person, that you see a future with the other person, and that you value a future with the other person. That's the netinah that we want. That's the gifting we want to give, and that's the gifting we want to receive.